Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I am Taylor Trask.
And I'm Todd A.
And we are back, Todd. It is December 2nd. I was going to say December 1st. December 2nd. So we've passed Thanksgiving. It's been a while. We talked well before that.
Yeah, that's true. We had to put a couple in the can. Did you travel for Thanksgiving?
I did. My wife and I went up to South Dakota, where I'm originally from, and did the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday thing there, and then came back down. And then Rachel spent time with her family in Denver. Her sister had come back. One of her sisters had come back, so nice. That was cool. And I came back down here and tried to get stuff done last weekend. So yeah, it's been a week since then. Even.
Did you have any inclement weather or any snow during Thanksgiving?
None.
Oh, really?
It was like, it was one of those beautiful, just sunny, like kind of like idyllic, warm kind of thing. Not too warm. It's Wyoming and South Dakota, but like Thanksgiving's, just everything was absolutely perfect. I was very pleased, even though I think it was the East Coast was just pummeled. That's
true. I was going to say, I was going to try to make you jealous because my parents visited me and it was like mid to upper 70s all week. So we're just like walking around in the sunshine every day, Now
have the fires, I guess, wound down. Is that still going on?
We went up to LA one day and we were all pretty convinced that what we saw on the horizon must have been smoke. And we did, we checked all the sources and it was just some strange like cloud or something in the mountains that day. Cause it did look like, at least on the, on the part where we were, which was east enough of LA that we weren't actually seeing smoke from the fires. But, and I think the winds kind of calmed down a little bit. And then this week we've had the opposite, which is we had rain everywhere. And that just makes the area that has suffered fires is worse off with that rain because the ground is already unstable. It creates mudslides and flooding and things like that. So, has not been great. Today is beautiful again. And because of the rain, we here in Orange County at least can see like snow in the mountain peaks and stuff, which is cool to me, where it's like 70-degree weather, but you can, see mountaintops with snow in them and stuff. So
yeah, we get to have that in April, May.
I was going to say, this is not like a unusual occurrence for you.
Just not this early. I mean, it's not 70 right now. That's for sure.
Seems like the last time I was there, which was May, it was like I got off the plane and was like, oh shit, and had to like layer up like I got out of the airport. Anyway, this is a show where we pick comic books to talk about, generally graphic novel length sort of things. And today is a pick of yours that you're bringing to us. What do you have?
I have a trade paperback for a series I have talked about before in previous episodes, various incarnations of this show. And it's a series that it's when I first jumped into Image, really heavily back in that sort of April of 2015, right around there, I discovered I had just kind of come in on East of West. So I was really like, what Image, what is going on here? Well, I did not realize the sort of depth and breadth. And so I got really hooked on a couple killer Image series at the time. East of West was the first one. Manifest Destiny is another one. The Wicked and the Divine is another one. And that's this series. I came in at, I think, volume 2, caught up on volume 1, came into volume 2. And today I'm talking about volume 7 of the Wicked and the Divine series, subtitle Mothering Invention. This is the penultimate trade paperback. There is one more arc left, like 5 or 6, and then the whole thing is done.
Does that mean they are done publishing single issues already?
No, they are they're now beginning the final. They're like right in the middle of the final run of single issues as I speak. This is again, December 2018. So you can keep, there's still a little bit more to go, but not much. So this is the volume that really starts to deliver answers. I'll get more into the details in a second.
Okay.
First one I just shout out, written by Kieran Gillen, art by Jamie McLevy, who is, these guys have been the creative force behind this since the beginning. So it's really cool to see that continuity. Colorist Matthew Wilson, letterer Clayton Cowles, published by Image, like I said. And this particular volume came out October of this year, 2018.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is fresh. I remember I walked same time I got a couple of the more recent books I've been reviewing on the show. I'd also picked this up from Escape Velocity, downtown Colorado Springs, and so I was really anxious to get through this. It's a thick one. It seems like there's more kind of DVD extras, as I like to say at the end. I think some of the actual individual chapters were longer as well. So this is, it has some heft to it. And like I said, this is the one that really starts to deliver answers. I'll give you there. There's not a back cover summary to this thing. They just going to give you some quotes. I always want to reread the general premise of Wicked and the Divine.
I was going to say, set us up on the general premise.
Yeah. So, and this is kind of like the main quote you see on all the back of the covers. It says, every 90 years, 12 gods return as young people. They are loved. They are hated. In 2 years, they are all dead. It's happening now. It's happening again. So that's the very beginning of issue 1, volume 1 of this whole thing. And you realize that the mythology of this world is that these 12 gods are reincarnated as teenagers. And it's every 90 years. We start the series, I believe, in 2015. Because I think it started in 2015. No, maybe it's a little earlier than that. 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. We start there, and so this is the next 90 years. The gods have been sort of remanifesting as teenagers who then become pop stars, and they're all kind of modeled loosely after actual contemporary music artists. Like there's one of the gods is named Indiana, and he looks a lot like Prince. Another guy looks a little bit like Jay-Z. And it's all based in London. So this is very much a British. Has that kind of interesting British sensibility about everything. And there's a main character named Laura, who's kind of in the beginning, at least originally, she is our sort of avatar into this world. She's our main protagonist. That changes after it becomes much more of an ensemble piece after about volumes 3 or 4. But Laura really wants, she kind of hero worships and like fangirl worships these gods. So we kind of see everything through her eyes. We're introduced to sort of the mechanics of the world. Along the way, a lot of gods have died or have been killed under really interesting or suspicious circumstances. There's been kind of a civil war of sorts between them all. And they're all getting more paranoid and panicked as they get closer, because after 2 years, they die. They can't, once they become a god, or once the god manifests in these teenagers, then there's 2 years and then they have to die. So They know their lifespan is not very long.
I got a technical question there. So do they, when you say they manifest in a teenager, does that person have like a life that they're aware of? And then all of a sudden one day they wake up and there's a god inhabiting their body, sort of like Dana and Zool? Or
good question.
Yeah.
No, it's much more like a mutant, like an X-Men, like, sort of manifesting their abilities. Like you're walking along and you're just a normal everyday kid. And then you encounter this woman, kind of this very interesting cryptic woman. I don't want to get too much into her because she's not around now and she has no involvement in volume 7.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't want to, I take that back.
Name her.
We'll get into that because there's a lot of we'll come to that. But you basically have this encounter with this woman, and you sort of like, if you're, for example, my favorite one is Lucy, who's basically Lucifer, who looks a lot like a White Duke version of David Bowie.
Oh,
yeah. It's kind of dresses like if Ruby Rose doesn't play her in the filmed adaptation, there's something horribly wrong with just America. And anyway,
I was thinking Annie Lennox, but then I thought, well, no, Annie Lennox is the female version of David.
Bingo. I was just gonna say, yeah. That is exactly right. So you're walking along, and then you encounter, and then she summons sort of these powers to you, and you have, from what I understand, like every time this happens, the gods have sort of a faint memory of their previous incarnations, but it's still mostly the kid, right? It's still them and their fears.
Oh, okay.
There's sort of they feel a heightened sense of responsibility in the world, and they again sort of a connection to their past selves, but it's not a possession. It's nothing like, it's definitely not Dana and Zool.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's more like it's more like, you just get like Shazam, like I'm a superhero now. What? It's kind of like that.
Gotcha.
So these gods have kind of existed. And like I said, we've been through a lot so far. And all along the way, there has been all these questions. They've done a good job of having these one-shot issues that take you to a different period in time along the last couple hundred years. So they did one back in the which would have been 180 years ago. They've done they did one before that. They've kind of flashed around. They did one that was like really early on, like almost Sumerian times. They did one that was one of the emperors of Rome was one of the gods that manifested. So you got to see how that worked out. And that was an interesting story too, because that particular character tried to the way it works is after 2 years, it's not that they just die. They have to basically kill each other off because it's forbidden for one of these gods to live past 2 years. So there's this scene in the very first issue where you see them all sitting around their table, and it's the ones who have still survived up to this point. It's the 2-year anniversary, and they basically all commit they all commit suicide together. They all point their fingers at the other one and bang, and they all go. And you kind of find out in this Caesar one that he was the first god to try to live past 2 years and basically went completely insane. And so the mother kind of character, the mysterious woman, motherly character that they all encounter, she, from that point on, decided to basically institute the fact they all have to die after 2 years because it'll go crazy. This evil kind of darkness will set in and they'll go crazy. So where we are in the books, in the series now, all the characters have we've wrestled with parts of that. There was a civil war, like I mentioned. And it's become very clear that one of these gods in particular and I will spoil it because if you've been following along, this obviously won't be a spoiler. If you haven't started the series yet, I mean, you tell me, would you, if I spoil this particular guy, because what we find at the beginning of volume 7 is one of the gods, and this was revealed, I think, in previous issues, like right before volume 7, but we find out one of the gods that we've been following this entire time is actually a especially evil god who manifested instead of what we were told that she actually is. And she's a major character that we had no clue was coming.
Ooh.
Yeah. I'll just say it. It's spoiler.
Well, I kind of feel like, this episode is volume 7. If you're not caught up, then hopefully what we've said so far entices you. I just quickly ran through our old episodes to try to find where we had mentioned Wick Div before. And I don't have a number for you, but we've definitely talked about it a number of times.
Yeah.
And I would say henceforth spoiler territory. Although you're going to say it so that, like, if you have not yet read volume 7, you're not going to spoil volume 7. You're going to spoil prior volumes.
Exactly. So this is something that was revealed. This was revealed before volume 7, but just so that is, and so I'm giving this to you as though you haven't read volume 7 yet. I'm not going to spoil crucial details in the volume, but we open on the fact that Minerva, the youngest, she was like 12 when she manifested, is actually the sort of vessel for this kind of ultimate evil that this other character that we were slowly kind of introduced to in back flashes. She is actually the sister of the mother, kind of the good witch, if you will, the mother character that we find. And so there are two sisters, and the whole issue starts with them, and they're kind of what set all of this in motion. And we're talking like early, probably dawn of the first man sort of, era. This is, they're one's wearing like, a skull of some kind of dinosaur creature as like a headdress, the other's got like kind of a totally just a feather dress on. So it's, really early man. And there's this kind of epic mythology play out that we actually see them confront each other, and they set up, it's kind of cryptic. They set up the rules for basically what's going to happen, why the gods are going to manifest every 90 years, what all that's being set up in this very first opening, couple pages. And you see them kind of hash this out, and you realize, oh, okay. And so that fills in a lot of details. Like you kind of figure out why, certain limitations are in place. And then from there, it just kicks into the ongoing story. We see, there have been, there's sort of some of the gods broke away. There's been some some infighting going on. So we pick back up right there. But then as that story progresses, we get a lot of flashbacks to a lot of things, scenes that happened off camera that we never really got the sense of. It flashes back to the very first scene in the very first issue. and you get more context about that. And it's just like, it starts to just answer questions incredibly fast. A lot of questions are answered. It sets up a really freaking interesting twist at the end. So the whole thing, just from start to finish, is very just fast moving. It's like they knew this, they were 14 issues from the end, let's say.
Yeah.
And this is definitely like it. It's the thing. I'll reference it again when we get to, if recommend it if you like. But what kept playing through my head as I was reading it was, oh my God, this is what Lost could have done. Like if they had just, and strangely enough, a lot of the same themes in this volume echo many themes in Lost, like the simplicity of good and evil, or black and white, or, two different senses of morality conflicting against each other. And one thinks that, the one, obviously both think they're the hero and think the other the villain, or vice versa. So a lot of those themes are playing, the mysteries of why sort of the rules of the world are the way they are, getting answered now, and sort of the higher mythology that plays into it. I just kept in my mind thinking, oh my God, Lost could have gotten here first, and have, this could have been as good in that context. And sadly, they just, as we all know, they missed every opportunity to do it. So I really like that. I'll come back to a couple more details in a second. I want to talk quickly about the art and the illustration. This, as per usual, the art is what really hooked me into this book to begin with. Everything is drawn very cinematically. It's one of those classic image books that feels mostly like, all the panels are storyboard frames, like really well done. Now, that said, it does still do really cool things, and subverts the medium. And one of my favorite chapters in this is, this isn't too spoilery. In the very middle was a chapter where it's just one. I see. Does it come first? No, it's just one issue, and it shows what happens. The motherly character I mentioned. I don't want to spoil too much in terms of who she is, really. But the motherly character I mentioned, it shows her in a scene. She has a scene early on in at the end of volume 2, she encounters Laura, our main character, and something happens that gets mirrored at the beginning of this issue. And you get to see for the next, 12 to 14 pages, a traditional 2x3, so 2 panels wide, three down, 2x3 grid. Every single page is a 2x3 grid, and every single panel has exactly the same setup, which is this motherly character encountering the Laura-like character from 90 years ago, 90 years before that. And it shows you every 90 years from the absolute beginning scene until she does it to Laura. So you get to see exactly, it ends in Great Britain 2014. It starts, it says like the first one is the Upper Nile, 3862 BC, Mesopotamia 3770 BC. It goes on and on and on. Comes, Egypt 2757 BC, Egypt 2574 BC, Australasia. It goes on and on. So it shows you that kind of, and you're like, well, that's interesting. You get to see two things. One, how many times this has happened and repeated itself. That whole, and then when I quoted that beginning where it says, it's happening now, it's happening again, that really felt resonant as you're kind of looking at those panels. The other thing it does, it sets up the next, the issue kind of right after this. There's another issue, and then this next one pops up, and it's exactly the same idea, except it's a 3x3 grid. And it's that motherly characters. It's like the other evil god, sort of of the grand two gods. There's this motherly character and this kind of other childlike evil essence. It's her story. It's exactly the same setup, but it starts with her, and she makes a terrible mistake. And it's just panel after panel of black. It's just, and it shows you all the same years that are passing by at the same period of time, and it ends. And it ends in that issue ends kind of in this. With this not a twist, but just this crazy resolution that you go, oh, that's why. Okay, so that just, it's a cool artistic subversion of the form, but it ends in this really compelling way that really delivers a lot of information too. So all of it was really, really well done. So this whole volume, just art, it's the same art we've come to know and love, except for that one bit in the middle. I quit reading it around volume 3 because they had those guest artists come in. It just wasn't wasn't doing it for me. So this, since then we've been, with the traditional team, and they just crush it. Every panel is just perfectly, wonderfully drawn, wonderfully colored. If you like that art at all, if you've read any of their stuff, it's get it for that.
I have a hard time describing it. It is very Euro and very like it's just, I mean, I don't know what if it's necessarily the lines of it or the coloring that is just so kind of loud, but the lines and the drawings are really almost sparse, but every panel is filled up with color.
Yeah.
And it's, it has that Patrick Nagel, Duran Rio kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
In a lot of places. And I never made it to volume 3. So I'm glad you brought that up about, you did kind of give up on it for a while with that volume 3, because the art, once it departed from that art style, you kind of lost interest.
Well, I'm glad let me be clear about this too, because I've been following the series, but I really, I've read mostly every issue. I've skipped a few here and there when I just knew it was going to be kind of a placeholder. In volume 3, I bought volume 1, I bought volume 2 immediately after reading volume 1. I was like, I need this one now. And then was a little disappointed by volume 3. And then 4, 5, 6, there was some good stuff in there, but it almost felt like a Marvel Netflix series where it's like, okay, these 3 volumes could have just been 2. Like there seemed like there was like a lot of wasted kind of space just on side stories and things that just didn't matter as much. So volume 7 feels like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. Like
gotcha.
you can almost compress 3, 4, 5, 6 into kind of its one ball of stuff. And you're obviously going to miss a lot if you just jump from volume 2 to volume 7. But if you want kind of a good anchor point to know like when it's really going to get good again, it's going to be between 2 and 7. Like that's really when. So I feel happy that I bought another volume in between. I think it was Imperial Phase Part 2. But like it's just there's, like I said, they could have combined a couple of these.
Now you mentioned that volume 7 was like it felt thicker. Are there more single issues in it, or did they just have more pages?
They just have more pages, I think.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually looking at my other volumes as we speak to judge.
Gotcha.
You know what? 5. I'm looking at 5 again. No, it's a little thicker than 5 too. And I think they have a few more DVD extras at the back as well. They had a couple of variants.
Oh yeah, in volume 7. So now that you're at 7, do you get the feeling that the creators really plotted it out to end around this time, or because it's interesting, they did sort of build in a life cycle for themselves with that, like, the gods can only survive for 2 years.
Yeah.
But do you feel like if it got lost a little bit in the middle there somewhat, is it like they, was that, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out, like, is that kind of filler and then they got back on the path to end it, or was this all plotted out from the beginning and they just wanted to tell all of these stories and make it to 8 volumes?
The way I understand it, they I think this may be completely wrong, but I remember reading recently they had, I think IO9 had a interview with Gillen and McKelvey. And I think Image picked it up for 47 issues, like knowing that, hey, it's going to be 47 issues for sure. And then they kind of played to that.
Yeah.
The first 2 volumes feel incredibly outlined. Like, oh, they were building to like really well crafted seasons of TV. And then it kind of felt like, and if they had, volume 3, even with the guest artist, they could have done one thing with the guest artist to make, like, I would have completely bought it if they had just done one thing and actually made it sort of fit into the name. Because there's something happens at the end of volume 1 that if they had made that like, oh, and that's why you're seeing each issue, it looks a different way because this happened, ... And if they had just threaded that through, volume 3 would have been amazing. Yeah. But they did not. And so it just kind of felt like, all right. So then volume 4 picks up it's like everything that happens in volume 3 is just a throwaway story, just because the artist wanted to draw something, and like, I guess, but nothing in terms of the actual evolution of the plot happens in volume 3. It's just a lot of discussions and conversations. So you can almost start with volume 4 right after volume 2, and that one's pretty good. But there's this thing. It's the Imperial Phase where the motherly character ends up going away. I don't want to spoil what happens exactly, but when she goes away, all the gods don't have sort of that governing force anymore, and they kind of go crazy. So it's a lot of like, what happens when they don't have anybody watching out for them? And it's like, this could have just been a couple, one shots. This didn't need to be 2 volumes.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's just, that felt like, well, there's no outline here. And now it feels like, oh, but like just all the stuff that they include intentionally in volume 7 leads me to believe like they always had this planned, because they laid the seeds for it really well. Like when they flash back to that first scene in issue 1, and they show you sort of stuff that you didn't see the first time around. It's just like, oh my God, like they clearly had,
right. Gotcha.
This was all, and even little things that I noticed in volume 1, like, there's a particular character in that scene where I was like, man, I wonder if this is going to end up happening. And sure enough, like all this time later, it's like either they had that planned or it was obvious to them too. Like, well, clearly we need to show something about this. So
yeah,
I know I'm speaking in tongues because I don't want to spoil too much.
Right. But no, that's really cool to know that they end up threading those things back together. As regular listeners know, like I've expressed a lot of frustration with series that hint that there's sort of an ending that they have to get to and then just continue going. And you're like, okay, now I don't know how you're going to wrap up these other threads. And
yeah,
looking at you, George Martin, and that kind of thing of like where, especially visually, it's cool to know the artist was in on all of those little threads that we're going to wrap up later. So
yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend this book. If you were, like I said, if you're a hardcore Wick Div fan, obviously, but if you're a casual one, this is a good place to jump back in. If it makes you ask questions about the plot, you can always go back and pick up single issues. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting one-shots now that are cool in their own right. So grab that. If you like Lost when it wasn't sucking, and and want to see kind of what could have been on Lost,
season 1.
No. Well, it's season 1, but also like as it went on, just there's there's a lot about the mythology of the island. Like once we meet, kind of the Jacob and the smoke monster and, what they really are, there's a lot of that you find at the beginning of volume 7. That you're like, ooh, this is what could have been. A lot of really really interesting parallels. And I'm also going to say, if you liked American Gods, the book, not the show, but the book.
I think that's a great entry point too, because I have not read the book, the American Gods book, but I was exposed to Wicked and Divine before the show started. And that comparison of like Laura as the whatever that traveler's name is in American Gods that is basically our protagonist, Shadow Moon. Yeah, I can see the parallels there of like, this is not necessarily an avatar for the audience.
Oh my God. In more ways than one. Oh no, there's a character development with Laura that I don't want to spoil. That is very reminiscent of what happens to Shadow Moon. Oh my God. Yeah.
That's is there any, can you think of other like comics with this art style that might, or something that might be similar to, like to recommend? Like, I mean, like if you liked a such and such book, you'll like,
if you followed Gillen McKelvey's other series, Phonogram, same great. Team, looks exactly the same. A lot of people who like Wick Div like Paper Girls as well, and like Sex Criminals. Those just, I think both of those series, Paper Girls came later, but I think Sex Criminals started around the same time as Wick Div was getting hot. So part of that could just be timing, but I know people who kind of like that aesthetic, probably Sex Criminals more so.
Yeah.
Because it has kind of a, again, very interesting use of color. Not that Paper Girls doesn't, but Paper Girls is a little bit more monochromatic.
Well, and I might throw in, it also seemed like there was just a golden year for Image, the year that like, I think it was all the same year where Saga, Wick Div, and Sex all started. Because I always tend to see those three together. So I might say Saga more than Sex Criminals, but you're right about the color. Sorry, not more than Sex Criminals, more than Paper Girls. But the Saga art is totally different than this. It's
Morning Glories is another one too that kind of comes to mind. That was a little earlier. That was like 2010. But I just remember like that. Yeah, same kind of Saga, East of West, Wick Div, Sex Criminals. Like there was sort of like like the HBO, like they can do no wrong era,
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, it's, we're
Oh,
probably in the era where we need to talk about comics that way of, what's holding on for too many seasons because the
man.
publisher doesn't have the next big thing loaded up
Ooh,
yet or something. I don't
good
think it's one of the
point.
big ones, but I mean, it's pretty big, but it's not one of those that you just mentioned in the Pantheon. But Black Science, for example, is one that I've, really expressed a
Yeah,
lot of frustration with, where it's
yeah,
like, this seemed to be heading somewhere. It just keeps getting farther and farther away.
yeah,
And it's gotten to the point where I'm just not picking up the trades until I sort of know they're headed somewhere,
yeah, yeah.
What does come after this? Because East of West ends next year, right?
Yep.
And yeah, that'll be interesting. I don't know where
Well,
Saga's headed.
I'll say it's interesting you mention all this because I had a conversation the other day about series like Nowhere Men or They're Not Like Us.
All right.
To my other, like, They're Not Like Us is probably hands down my favorite Image series. It would be my favorite Image series if they just make the damn thing faster. And Nowhere Men is like, they put out volume 1 like 8 years ago or whatever it was. And they're like, and now here comes volume 2. And they put out like 4 issues or 5 issues of that. And then they stopped whole hog. And it's like, well, we'll get back to that. So there's these other like killer Image series out there that just sort of eke along for no other reason than the creators are either doing way too many other things, although that doesn't stop John Hickman at all.
Right.
That dude he must have like a multiplicity situation going on in his basement where there's just like a bunch of Michael Keaton's just kind of hanging out writing all these series for him.
Yeah, for sure.
Surely, because I don't understand how that guy gets anything. Maybe he and Kirkman did some kind of deal with the devil, and because Kirkman's just as prolific. Although
Yeah.
I think Hickman's more. Anyway, there's all these series, so it's like I really wish, as these things end, I hope some of these other things that have been kind of on the vine for a while finish or get kind of routed back towards that too. It would be great to see, I love this creative team. I hope they take a break and then do something else completely different.
Yeah.
Because Phonogram was kind of almost like a Wicked and Divine prototype, if you will. It has a lot to do with pop music and youth culture and, Eurocentric kind of ideals and things like that. So it was almost kind of like a dry run for this.
Yeah.
I feel like, or for some of the ideas in Wick Div. So I would love to see them do something different. Manifest Destiny's coming to an end too, I think. That's near its conclusion, I believe.
I love that idea to think of them like, what will they do next? Because so I read volume 1 of this largely on your recommendation and pretty much liked all the writing and the art, and volume 2 for some reason lost me. And the interesting thing, as we always bring up in like comparing notes, is volume 1 I read in paperback and volume 2 I read digitally because I got it on one of those Image digital sales. And I wonder if that was just like, it took me out of it for whatever reason. And I just remember it being, and I knew by that point that volume 3 was going to switch up artists. And I just felt like I'm not really, whatever. I'm not committed. So I kind of gave up. But yeah, I would love to see Gillen and McKelvey, what they do next, and follow that.
Yeah. Anywho, you can find this book at your local comic shop. And I'm sure every shop has it.
Yeah.
Most recent trades, imagecomics.com. Although it is interesting to know, imagecomics.com is pushing most of their digital stuff now to Comixology, which is sad and interesting. And I understand, but it was sort of shocking to get that email. I think you and I chatted about that a couple weeks ago. So yeah, just, go grab it wherever you can find great books like this.
On this new comic book day, go to your comic book shop.
That's right. Yeah. Get it, pull list, or just walk in. If there's a shop you haven't been to in a while, or if there's a shop you've been like, hey, I'd love to go in there. I just didn't know what to ask for. Ask for the Wicked and Divine Volume 7.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for the show, you can find us on Stitcher and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and Google Play Music and Podbean and anywhere else that great podcasts are downloaded and listened to. We are primarily on Instagram as panelism.inc, and we also have a website at panelism.inc. It's the same thing. So definitely subscribe, rate, share with your friends, and tell us what you would like us to read next, and maybe we can have a little book club here.
Heck yeah. Been great talking to you, sir. We'll catch you on your next episode, and we'll catch you guys on that episode as well. Have a great one.